Good evening, everyone. My name is Elian Ramos, and I'll be your host tonight. We're going to be talking tonight about the Latino vote. As you probably have heard in reports online and everywhere else, there's a surge in the amount of Latinos that turn 18 every day. The number is about 2,000 Latinos turn 18 every day, and these are the latest projections. But they foresee that that number is going to jump from it's going to jump to 40 million Latinos a year by the year 2030. But in spite of that growth, what we have seen is that the Latinos are still not really engaged. This is a community that is still pretty much considered bystanders in terms of politics. And so the Pew Research conducted actually a study that showed that 32% of the bystanders, these are the people who don't engage politically in the country, 32% are Latinos. And so with the midterms coming right up around the corner, there's no time like today to talk about this issue. This is the time when we need to make sure that our population is engaged before the elections come. And so to talk about this and to talk about also how what different things the different organizations are doing to engage the Latino vote and to mobilize people to become more politically engaged, I have here a group of experts from many different organizations. These are the people who are at the forefront in mobilizing Latinos, not only online but also with activities and initiatives on the ground. So the first person here is Jessica Reeves, who is the VP of Partnership at Voto Latino. Hello, Jessica.
Hello. How are you doing?
Very good. Good to have you. Next, we have Hector Sanchez, who is the Executive Director at LCLAA, which is the Labor Council of Latin American Advancement. And he's also the chair at NHLA, which is the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. How are you, Hector?
Very good. Thanks for the invitation, Elian.
Next, we have Erin Hustings, who is the Senior Policy Analyst at NALEO Educational Fund. How are you, Erin?
Doing very well. Thanks for having us. Thanks for hosting this important discussion.
Thank you for being here. And last but not least, we have Zenon Jaimes Perez, who is the Policy Advocate for Generation Progress. How are you, Zenon?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
And so let's jump right into the questions. I know that Hector has to leave early. He has a previous commitment, and so we're going to let's talk about the theme in general first, and then I'm going to talk to Hector about a recent report that LCLAA put out. So let's talk about this Latino bloc. It seems like in every election there's a news spur of talking about the Latinos and the importance of the Latino vote. Why do you think the Latino vote receives so much attention? Who wants to go first?
So I can kick off, and I think this is something that a lot of us have been watching for a long time, but Latinos are, as a lot of us know, one of the fastest growing groups in the country. But not only are they the fastest growing, they're also the youngest. Average Americans are in their mid-40s. Average Latinos are in their mid-20s, which really says something about what the future of the country will look like. In a lot of states, in 17 states, I think it's 1 out of 5 kindergartners is Latino. In states like Texas, 50% of public school students are Latino. So I think all this goes to say that Latinos are a growing population in the country, but becoming a much bigger population and a bigger percentage of Americans. So really shaping the face of America.
And what do you think are the most important issues for Latinos?
Oh, sorry.
When it comes to getting them out to vote. Go ahead.
was just going to say, we all know the polling tells us that the Latino electorate is concerned about the same things as any American. And I don't have precise numbers in front of me, but it's jobs and education and healthcare, providing for families. Immigration is up there more so for our community than others, because more members of our community are personally affected in some way, or have friends or family who are personally affected. But by and large, I'd say that the things Latino voters care about are the same things that all Americans care about.
That's correct.
And so, do you all agree with this? Hector, I know that your organization just put out a report a couple of weeks ago talking about the Latino vote, and in particular about the voter ID laws. I know that some advocacy groups, including NALEO, were part of the whole report and the whole investigation. So can you tell us a little bit more about your findings, and what are the implications of those findings for the Latino voters?
No, thank you. And let me put it in the context of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, which is the coalition of the 37 national important Latino organizations. And we come together to debate and analyze policy and propose policies to Republicans, to Democrats, to the president, and then build campaigns around these critical issues. One of the critical campaigns that we have right now is Latinos United for Voting Rights, because when we are talking about the Latino vote, there are two different elements. One is the structural challenges that exclude Latinos from the basic elements of democracy, that make it harder for Latinos to go and vote, that make it harder to Latinos to do civic participation, just to engage in the general process. And that's why this report is about, and I'm going to talk about it in 1 second. The second part is what we as organizations, what we as a community need to do to make sure that we are more aggressive, engaging in all the basic elements of the civic participation. So let me talk about the Voting Rights Act and some of the structural challenges that we see in the nation that make it harder or try to exclude Latinos from the democratic process. So 1 year ago this week, the Shelby decision dealt a severe blow to one of the most powerful civil rights enforcement tools ever enacted, which is the Voting Rights Act, VRA. Since Shelby County, jurisdictions in at least 7 states attempted to or succeeded in passing discriminatory voting policies. The goal behind these policies seems obvious, which is disadvantage minority voters, and particularly the Latino community, in the political process. To help restore much needed voting rights protections, NHLA or coalition recently gathered on the steps of the Supreme Court to announce the formal launch of Latinos United for a Voting Rights campaign. This in coalition with our friends of NALEO, which Erin is here representing NALEO, and also with our friends from MALDEF. The report underscores the need for Congress to move legislatively on updating the Voting Rights Act. It should remove any doubt that discrimination still exists and shows that the nation's fastest growing voter segment needs a reinvigorated Voting Rights Act. Just to give you an idea of how important this is, our report notes that almost 7 million Latino eligible voters live in jurisdictions that were previously subject to the preclearance requirements, but are now without these protections. We're talking about the states like Alaska, Alabama, Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, and other states, Florida, Michigan, etc. So it's very important to put it in this context, because when people come trying to blame Latinos for not coming out to vote, it's important to organize, to engage, but at the same time, us as organizations are trying to break the structural challenges that are trying to exclude Latinos from the democratic process.
That's very important. So can you all talk about what are some of those things that Latino organizations are doing to counter these? Because it sounds like these are very strategic things put in place to prevent people of color, not just Latinos, from voting. So what are you guys doing, and you and other organizations, to prevent this?
Well,
Anyone?
sure, I can speak first. Um, One of the things that we lost with Shelby County in the end of the pre-clearance process was notice of when voting changes are being made in, at least in the 16 states that were wholly or partially covered by the pre-clearance process that the Supreme Court struck down. That process used to give us, I mean, just put into the public domain the fact that a change was being made in a particular place. And we don't have that basic information anymore about when, especially local jurisdictions, city councils and school boards and county commissions are changing their voting policies in a way that may make it more difficult for Latino voters and others to cast their ballots. So one of the things that we most need is eyes on the ground and people to remain vigilant and watch for not only things that don't seem right to them, experiences that they may personally have at the polls, but anything that they hear, anything that they observe in their communities. We are intensifying our efforts to get out information about our the NALEO Educational Fund runs a bilingual voter protection hotline year-round. The phone number is 888-VEI-VOTA, and we're intensifying our efforts to publicize that number and to collect, to let people know that if they have problems voting, we want them to call and we want to hear about it. And that's, I mean, knowledge is the most important and most fundamental tool that we could have to combat the policies that are making it harder for Latinos to vote.
Anybody else?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about, we at Voto Latino have seen a lot of the effects of attacks on voting rights, things like voter ID, a lot of stuff that Hector and Erin mentioned. What we're working on doing now is partnering with a number of groups to translate this for our audiences. So take complicated information and really, really help break it down to help folks understand that, in somewhere like Texas, you're a young student, you can go register to vote with a some sort of NRA membership document, but not necessarily with a student ID. So a lot of our audience is disenfranchised, but we want to break it down and help translate how it's relevant to their everyday lives.
And I guess speaking from my position too, I don't necessarily work at a Latino-focused organization. We work at a youth-based organization. And one of the things that we really focus on is sort of looking at those intersections, right? I mean, in North Carolina, had the highest Latino population growth in the country over the past decade, and most of that is being led by immigrant and first-generation sort of young Latinos that are coming of age. And not only are there attacks on people of color voting, but there's just youth voting is under attack, right? So the North Carolina passed most stringent legislation against voting booths on campuses, against same-day registration, against making it easier for voter registration drives, and even has stringent sort of policies on who can be poll workers, right? The average age of a poll worker in this country is 76 years old, right? So when you're a young Latino person going to vote for the first time, you've never seen a ballot in your life, and that was my own experience, right? My parents couldn't vote because they were undocumented, and so I didn't see a ballot for the first time until I was 18. So I go into my first ballot booth, and it's a 76-year-old woman, and she can't really explain to me what's going on, and I'm learning on this process, right? So thinking of ways of how we can sort of engage colleges and universities to sort of help students, and especially students of color, get through that voting process is what we do here at Generation Party.
Yeah. If I can revisit, Elian, kind of like the basic question of why the vote is so important. And sometimes we look at it from a very general perspective, but we don't see the direct implications that civic participation that the vote has in our daily lives. at a time when we're facing so many challenges as a community and so many attacks correlated in many aspects to all these anti-immigrant pieces of legislation and anti-Latino elements with hate crimes against Latinos growing 50%, the vulnerability of Latino workers increasing also drastically in the last number of years. We need to make sure that we have politicians that represent the critical values of the Latino community. So when we go out to vote, we're really working on having better schools. We're working on having better parks. We're working on having better streets. I have a friend who directs one of the Latino organizations that told me they organized in one street that had it was a dirt street. They have nothing of the basic elements, one of the poorest counties in the nation. They organized, they went out to vote, they put together 500 people to vote. In the next election, they had a very beautiful and clean street. So there are direct implications of civic participation in going out to vote. It's not just an abstract concept. It has direct implications. Second, it's very important to organize, and as LACLA and also as groups of NHLA, we're making sure that we're investing our limited resources in doing voter registration drives, that we all go out to the communities and do voter education, that we do GOTV drives. So it's very important to have a leadership in your communities. You can be a young student that engages and is getting out to vote, is getting out the vote, or is doing voter registration. It's very important. And most of the people doing this were actually volunteers. So it's very important to engage in organizations like the ones that we have in this Google Hangout. But we have another group of Latino organizations that are also doing great work if they're in your communities. It's really important now more than ever to make sure that we are voting in record numbers, that we're getting our families, or primos, or primas, or hermanos, everybody engaged in this important political and civic participation process.
Very, very important that we know this. And Hector, I want to make a little parenthesis here because I know that you had to go. I just want to check that you're still okay to stay a couple of minutes, but if you have to leave, it's okay too. I just wanted to let you know that it's 7:19 right now.
Thank you, Eliana.
Okay, but all right. So let's go with what Hector was saying right now. Part of the whole push, in my view, for to this thing to prevent Latinos from voting, and this whole craziness also speaks to the power of the Latino vote when we do exert it, right? And we're seeing this in states, for example, where Latinos are not traditionally, you don't think that Latinos live in those states, but they are growing as a population in those states. And so, how do you think the Latinos are affecting the balance of the electoral power, not only in those states, but all over the country? Who wants to talk about that?
So one of the things that we work on, especially sort of economic issues for young people, and one of the things that we're seeing throughout the country is that even if it's not necessarily at a federal level engagement of voting, we're seeing a lot of young people of color, especially Latinos, taking sort of leads on minimum wage increases and sort of fighting for that sort of, and fighting for in-state tuition for their peers and who are undocumented, fighting for other sort of anti-poverty measures that are going on, especially in big cities. So in terms of what we think of, like, how do we engage this, it doesn't necessarily always have to look at the federal level as much as we can look at what sort of state-based actions we can take to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Sure, I can jump in. I think that point supports what we've been talking about a little bit in terms of Latinos becoming a much bigger voting bloc and a much bigger political power. I think we're seeing the numbers grow in states where traditionally, I guess they haven't been considered high Latino states. We're, for example, doing a lot more work through our Trend Your Voice program in states like Utah and a number of other places where the Latino population is growing and is starting to see their political power. I think we're also seeing that, I think Hector mentioned a little bit earlier, we're also seeing that in increases in leaders, in folks like Julian Castro being appointed to Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. But hopefully it's something that we continue seeing. But it's not going to matter if folks don't start with registering to vote and then holding those elected officials accountable and starting programs like Zenon was talking about.
So now, go ahead, Erin.
Sorry, it's really quick. At the federal level, we saw people saying in the wake of the November 2012 election, oh my gosh, record Latino vote. And of course, it's no coincidence that then in 2013 we got the Senate passing immigration reform. It didn't obviously pass the finish line in the House, but again, that's instructive. Senators are people who are going to be running for re-election statewide, and many senators see their future electoral prospects hinging on a growing Latino vote, and that's an example of what that gets us.
I think I'll add one thing to that really quickly about Latinos not being party loyal. So I think it's an important thing to note for leaders and politicians out there that just because they live in a high Hispanic state or they maybe originally had quote unquote the Latino vote, they need to I guess follow through with things, and that's hopefully something that we'll see this coming election.
Now, in terms of that, in terms of participation, I think it's very important for the organizations who work on this kind of work to engage the younger voters. I mean, we talked in the beginning about how many young people turn 18 every single day. So imagine the power if all of those people actually turned out to vote, and all of the people who are eligible to vote. So I know Jessica and Sen and your organizations work with the youth. What are some of the strategies and things that work the best to mobilize the younger people, since you work on that every day?
I guess one of the things that I can say that's sort of, I think, important for me, but also for the organization, is sort of the stopping of Hispandering, I think is a term I've heard a lot. It's sort of, I think a lot of Latino youth know what they need, and a lot of the times it's just about taking that leadership, right? We need organizations to sort of not just sort of pay that lip service and put bilingual words every once in a while in sort of their leaflets or their voter registration drives, to sort of hire Latino voters too, right? Like hire Latino young people. When we talk about why people aren't engaging, well, Latino young people ages 18 to 34 have twice as high a rate of unemployment than the general population, right? So when we talk about sort of making sure that people are represented in organizations, that they see themselves too, right? It's not just about getting that one person, that one token, or that one sort of spokesperson for the young people, right? It's about sort of seeing yourself reflected in the values and in the structure of an organization that I think is important for us.
It's important to remember that Latinos are not like a homogeneous group anyway, right? We have all of these different nuances to our ethnicity, all of these different groups and different blocks within our ethnicity. So to what degree do you think that things like immigration or topics that are considered like traditionally Latino, what do you think how do you think that's going to impact the way that our community votes?
As you were asking that, I thought to say that polls have actually shown us that Latinos who don't vote tend to be a little bit more conservative than Latinos who do vote, which is just another way of saying that absolutely nobody should be taking the Latino vote for granted, and it's not monolithic. I think, and I hope I don't steal words out of my friends' mouths, but I mean, I think something like immigration is obviously seen as a marker of how you feel about a diverse America, let's say, or I mean, it's kind of become a proxy for how you feel about the growing Latino population in this country, and so it's not that all Latinos have a a uniform or just a single point of view or priorities or wishes in the domain of immigration policy, but that the way that you talk about those issues can be seen as a clear indicator of how you feel about Latinos writ large.
Anyone else? I agree with you actually. I think even if you cannot be a single issue voter, right? But when you hear all of the rhetoric that is used to refer to Latinos in the media and from the different politicians too, regardless of how I feel about immigration, it's going to affect me in the way that I perceive that you whether you care or not about who I am as an individual, right? What do you guys?
I think that's something that we're starting to see in a lot of the issues happening along the border right now. All the attention that children, immigrants, and quote-unquote refugees are getting. A lot of folks, I think, are starting to realize that this isn't just a Latino issue. It's not just an immigration issue. It's really a human rights issue. Were these kids from any other country, it would be a completely different conversation.
Exactly. And so based on that, what are your predictions for the likelihood of Latino participation in the coming elections? We have an election in November. We have primaries that are going on all over the country. And they've been going on for a while now. So what do you think the Latinos are going to vote in greater numbers now? I mean, we're kind of awakening to our power now. I've had conversations in other Hangouts about this. But do you predict that we're going to come out in greater numbers, or what do you think? What is your prediction?
I don't think I can make any crystal ball predictions, but I can definitely say that I hope that folks are starting to wake up and that the predictions that others have made start coming true, and that people realize the incredible power that their vote has. So all I can say is that I hope folks are turning out in registered numbers, and that's what Voto Latino is working to do.
I think that there are a lot of moving pieces. There's the voter suppression and the laws that make it harder to vote that we've talked about, and unfortunately I think we're doing a little bit worse on that front, where we're less able to combat those things with a fully functioning Voting Rights Act. On the other hand, we've seen evidence that other things matter maybe just as much as kind of the environment, the feel of the polling place, or a voter ID law or anything like that. Things like whether a candidate has asked you to vote, whether people feel really engaged by the political process, whether they feel welcomed, and it has to do with did I get a robocall from a candidate? I mean, I know everybody is like, oh, please don't robocall me, but it shows that you're expected to, and that folks want you to participate in the process, and that kind of thing makes a difference. It also depends on how we, what messaging we seize upon. We've seen evidence in some polling and some focus group work that we've done that people who don't vote are very knowledgeable about the issues, and they care what's going on, and they want to be involved, but they don't feel like voting is going to make a difference. And one of the more compelling messages is to talk about kind of civil rights issues, or suggest get people to buy into the thought that if I vote, it will make a difference in laws about racial profiling, or to tie it to things that really bring up visceral feelings for people. So it depends on how well we do with messaging, how well we do with outreach, how well candidates engage the Latino community, and how the electoral process responds to the door that's been left open by the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And I guess I will say that it depends on sort of the investment that organizations do and the focus they give, right? I'm really excited to see what happens in Texas and opposed to other places where sort of there's been a lot of investment. But another thing I will say is that I think it's going to be different because I think we focus a lot on how Latinos are really young, and one of the things I really do want to emphasize is that young Latinos aren't growing up in a vacuum, right? The millennial generation is the most diverse generation we've seen in terms of sexual orientation, gender identity, race, ethnicity, religion, every sort of feature that we can talk about. And when we look at polling, it actually shows that young Latinos care about LGBT rights, they care about reproductive rights, they care about sort of the issues that affect the whole sort of gamut of diversity and the community that they exist in. So I think that part of the way we engage also has to look at, not dismissing the Latino community for being anti-LGBT, but sort of knowing that, we can engage people in these issues. It's not that difficult to talk to your mom or tu abuelita or tu tío, tía about, like, what does it mean to be an LGBT-friendly voter, right? And especially for young Latinos who are actually more likely to be LGBT than their non-Latino counterparts, right? So sort of having those questions too, especially for young Latinos, is going to be especially important. And I think it's going to change some of the election decisions.
Jessica, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree. I think that a lot of the partnerships and a lot of the work that we do tries to address all of the aspects of provide tools for all of the interests and all of the issues that affect this community, which is incredibly diverse, not only culturally, but in terms of party affiliation, in terms of background, educational, economic, everything. So it's I think a real reflection of what the country is, and that's the way that we try to treat it.
I think part of it has to do also with getting people to understand that it's not just voting every 4 years and then you forget about what's going on. It's about being engaged in calling your representatives every day. It's about being engaged about there's a special election or a primary, or there's a city council meeting, and being engaged on a daily basis, understanding that these people who are representing you, they're representing you because you actually pay their salaries. And so they have to work for you. If you don't choose who's going to work for you, then you get stuck with whatever other people want, right? So I think it's kind of making that connection in people's heads. So based on what you guys are saying in the whole conversation, what would be your call to action for people, those people who are watching this broadcast right now? How do we move to a place where all Latinos who are eligible can vote? What would you say to somebody who doesn't really care?
Sure. I think I would say please take the first step and register to vote at votolatino.org. But then take the second step of sending either 5 of a social media message or an email or whatever it is that you want to a text to 5 of your friends and family. I think a lot of us can, Latinos are very social creatures, so I think a lot of us can knock out at least 20 in just our immediate family and friend circles. So maybe if you're thinking that your vote doesn't count, then get a group together and make sure that your vote does count.
Perfect. Anybody else?
I think I just want to echo what Jessica said. I think one of the hardest things, and when I realized was like, oh, I'm really passionate about these things, but I never really had the language to go back and talk to my friends and family. And I think that some of the most difficult step to take is just asking your best friend or your uncle if they're registered. I think it starts at home, right? And if a lot of people say that Latinos are family oriented, let's keep it in the family, right?
Exactly. How about you, Erin?
Oh, everybody took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say we need people to ask their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, or, people that ask them to vote, ask them if they've registered. It's person to person. That's where I think ultimately we'll have make the most difference and have the most effect in engaging people who aren't already there.
And so to end the conversation, because I know that we're going a little bit over time here, but I want you guys to quickly give me your websites so that people know where to find more information about your organizations.
We're www.naleo.org.
Okay.
We're genprogress.org. And we have a lot of information up there, and our national summit's tomorrow too, so you should follow along on #MakeProgress and sort of ask your questions to all of our panelists, including Vice President Biden tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. How about you, Jessica?
And we're votolatino.org, but we also share a lot of information on social media, so please follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Awesome. And you're Voto Latino on Twitter and Voto Latino on Facebook. It's pretty easy. So I want to end by thanking all of you for making the time to be here. Thank you to Hector Sanchez, who had to leave early, but he obviously had a lot of great points to make, a lot of great information to share. Thank you to Jessica Reeves from Voto Latino. Thank you, Erin Hustings from NALEO. Thank you, Zenon James Perez from Generation Progress. And thank you all for watching tonight. You're going to be able to watch this full broadcast on my YouTube channel. It is youtube.com/user/Elian Ramos. Or on my blog. I'm going to do a recap of the conversation, and the blog is ergeekgoddess.com. And I want to thank you all for watching, and thank you guys again for being here. I see you next week. And one quick note before I leave, today I launched, together with the Dolores Huerta Foundation and a host of other organizations, a project called the Border Kids Relief. And we're at borderkidsrelief.org, and it's a campaign to help the organizations who are aiding these children at the border. So everybody who's watching, please check us out. We're trying to help as much as we can, and you can join us. We're looking for partners and volunteers. So thank you all for watching, and thank you for being here, guys. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.